Hello, I am Andrzej Wiśniewski from the C64 PSU, and you are listening to Scene World podcast.
Hey, it's the Scene World podcast. I'm AJ. That's Jörg over there.
Hi there.
The land of Germany.
Right.
In a minute, we are talking to Brenda Romero.
Right. Well, who doesn't know her? Well, you should know her. She worked on computer games since a long time on Wizardry.
Yes.
Once. Yeah. So, and she's once said in an interview where she was interviewed that she was even earlier than John Romero. But John Romero, I already interviewed a couple of years ago for an historical interview, and so it took a few years until Brenda Romero had the time to talk to us. And yes, so this is it. This is the follow-up of the Romeros, but this time with Brenda Romero.
Yes.
Of course, I insisted on interviewing them separately to give each of them their own career story to talk to us. So.
Correct.
But before we do that,
interestingly, John Romero, a lot of his games and stuff were published by Softdisk Publishing, which did Lodestar, which I was also published by. So
nice.
But, yeah. So anyway, before the news.
Right. Yeah.
Or before them, rather, is the news. God.
Right.
We're professionals.
Right. So, apparently most of us heard of already. Bill Hurt released a book together, co-authored with Margaret Morabito, and it's about the time at Commodore in the 1980s and the genesis of the computers such as the C128, and it's called Back into the Storm.
Yes, and he says most of us heard about it because somehow this missed my radar, and I did not know about this until now.
Back into the Storm, a designs engineer stories of Commodore computers in the 1980s.
Bill Hurt's full of awesome stories about his time at Commodore and how much of a if you'll pardon the expression, a clusterfuck Commodore was at the time.
Right, yeah.
You know, how they kind of snuck things into the 128 without, they just did it without telling anybody, and then by the time anyone found out about it, it was too late to take it out. So,
yeah,
he's also the guy behind the +4 in the 16 line.
Exactly,
that whole line.
That's most famous in East Europe.
Yeah, the TED chip. That was his baby.
Yep.
And I believe that they were going to try to put that in the 128, but for some reason it didn't work, and that's why they ended up having to use...
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know. There was something. They had to come up with their own 80-column chips, and they pulled it from another place that wasn't ready yet, and yeah.
Yeah, so, and the other news is that, My Nintendo News actually released a news article about Nintendo originally intended to be involved in the Tokyo Olympics, featuring Lady Gaga emerging from a warp pipe from Super Mario Bros. But that didn't happen. So we will link to that story.
Okay.
And I saw on Twitter that Arcanic Labs actually released a tweet with a screenshot about the current status of Lost Realms of the Morkadasta Episode 1. That's a C64 conversion of a TI-99 4A game.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually running a Kickstarter at the moment.
Oh, okay. What's the link for that?
We'll post a link to that. And it's actually a reprint, a second printing.
Okay.
It's called Realms of the Antiquary, the Scattered Crown Collector's Edition.
Okay.
So there we go. Yeah. Yep.
Cool.
So, yeah, as I said, so there well, it may sound like the two are connected, but they aren't. Well, it's just by chance both RPGs,
Mhm.
but yeah.
Okay. Okay.
It's interesting. Well, the funny thing is, originally I wasn't sure for what platform that was because it's not mentioned in the pledges actually, in
Right.
the rewards
Mhm.
that you could pledge for. But if you go to campaign, it's actually saying in the story that it's a TI-99 for a game.
Hmm.
And my my first impression for some reason was that the game from Arcanix Labs is a C64 version of the TI-99 game, but that isn't. So well,
Okay.
anyway, things can get confusing with all those releases in Kickstarters.
baffled.
But both
baffled.
happen to be RPG games,
Mhm. Mhm.
and they are actually called CRPG. And at the
Mhm.
moment, as I'm not really a fan of the genre, I don't know if C stands for character set RPG.
Don't know.
I have no idea what that C stands for in RPG. I know that RPG stands for role playing game, but CRPG probably means
A
character.
computer role playing game.
Computer. Okay, so not character set.
No. No.
Right. Yeah. We will also hear in the story of Brenda Romero that actually her role playing game experience started with tabletop games. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah. So, so perhaps that's a good moment to jump over
Yes.
from the news section to the interview. So
I think so
enjoy.
too.
Bye bye. Whoa. So today we are having another podcast guest again, and this time it's Brenda Romero. Hello, Brenda.
Hey,
Welcome to the show.
thank you.
Yeah. And well, so hope everything is fine over there in Ireland.
Yeah, it's great actually. I mean, well, we're finally opening back up, so it's it's actually pretty exciting. I
True.
never thought I'd say I was as excited as I am to go to a restaurant, but I've never been this unreasonably excited to go to a restaurant in my life.
Right. So we talk today because basically you are a very known game designer, and there's something you always point out in interviews. You always point out that you were first in the industry than John.
That's only, the funny thing about it is I think that's because nobody ever, when John is with me, well, I won't point it out unless somebody, how do I even say, how that started is like, when John and I are together, you cannot even imagine the amount of times that people will say, oh, does your wife make games too? Or they're surprised. And I can assure you, nobody has ever said that, like, oh, does your husband make games too? Right? Or there's this assumption like, oh, you're in marketing or you're in PR or something like that, that actually I want to just be very clear that those roles are obviously critically important to games.
Right.
But people are surprised, and I've actually had the specific instance I think you're talking about. I was speaking at a conference,
Right.
and I was talking about my career. And
Right.
just saying that, and it was about staying in the industry, and I've stayed in the industry for a really long time, and so people, it's whoever it was who covered, the conference highlights of the day, actually said that I was talking about John's career, right? And so, like, no, I was talking about my own, and in fact, I've been in the game industry longer than he has. And so I think that's it's part of one of the talks that I give, just about like, why would you assume that I'm at a game conference giving a talk on John's career? I mean, in fairness, at this point, I probably could.
Yeah.
But still, it was a ridiculous assumption. Like, obviously, she must be talking about his career.
And that is actually, and also because we spoke to other people that had something to say on Wizardry, when I emailed you both, inviting you both, and I remember you were emailing me back, and I said, no, I want to talk to you guys separately. So John was first, and then till you got some time, it took a while. Let's start how we start always with our guests. How did it happen that you got in touch with computers and stuff? I mean, you had to start in the career 81, so I guess perhaps at the age of the 70s you got in touch with computers?
The first thing, well, I started making games when I was probably 5 or 6. Not obviously on computers, but we didn't have a lot of money. It was just me and my mom, and so we would go to yard sales or boot sales or flea markets, whatever you want to call them. And she would give me usually a dime, and with a dime I could get whatever I wanted. But you can't get much of a dime. So what I did get is I would buy board games, and if they might have a board game that was $2 if it had all its pieces. But if it didn't have all its pieces, you could have it for a dime. And so I ended up just collecting a bunch of board game pieces, and then I would make my own board games from those. And so that is how I started. And then at some point in time, my mom gets me D&D, the original one, which also probably came from a flea market, because I can't even imagine where that would have been sold. And then she comes home with a VIC-20. And the VIC-20 is the first time which I'm also positive came from a flea market. Well, we had no money, so assume that anything that comes into the house is given or found or something.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my first introduction to it. And then when I got to Surtech when I was 15 years old, that's when I actually, I'm on the then super powerhouse that was an Apple II, which sounds ridiculous now, but absolutely was a super powerhouse at the time.
So VIC-20, I don't know about that.
Well, well, the thing is, I remember when I saw the Apple II once, I saw it basically running Flight Simulator 2. I was like, okay, it doesn't really look better than on the C64, so I was like, okay, it's not too much comparable, perhaps.
Whatever monitor I was on with the VIC-20, it was a black and white monitor, so I would not have seen anything. And when I first saw Wizardry, it had, actually, I would have gotten into programming at high school. Like back then, it's funny because nowadays schools tend to just put you in with, typing and learning how to do spreadsheets and that sort of stuff.
Right.
But back then, like if you wanted a spreadsheet, you had to code it, basically.
Yes.
So I was actually taking programming basic and then Pascal at the high school. So we had a math teacher, Mr. Kavanaugh, who loved programming and was happy to introduce it to people. And so I loved that class, absolutely loved it. And then I would have had access to those computers in high school, but then I started working at Surtech, and that was love at first sight. Like, I know nowadays when people first see VR, there's loads of reaction videos, right? Like people go like, ah, right? For me, that's what it was like seeing the wizard, animating in the cauldron. I was mind blown. I've never seen anything like that. Just, my God, it was love at first sight. And my first day at work, I was supposed to work 4 to 8, and I would obviously show up a little bit early, but I was supposed to work 4 to 8, and I would come in from 3 to 8, and then 2 to 9, and then 1 to 10. I come in on, is anybody going to be in the office on the weekend so I can play this game? Absolutely, head over heels. There's really not, there are very few games that have taken me the way Wizardry did. That was it. I was gone.
Really quickly, just to jump back, how did you do in Pascal class?
How did I do in Pascal? Oh, jeez, I don't remember, but I'm sure I did well. I love coding.
I love coding. I was really good at assembly language and basic, but when we got to Pascal, I was awful. I couldn't get it. Never could get it.
Yeah, I didn't. The interesting thing is I have next to no memory of Pascal. But the reason I felt strongly that I needed to learn Pascal was because Wizardry was written in USDC, yeah, USDC Pascal, and I mean, hopefully I've got that right. Oh, sorry.
No problem.
That it was. Let me just shut this off. It's my alarm reminding me of this, which is for some reason going off. Oh no, never mind. It was my alarm for. Never mind. So I started. I'm not sure. Anyway, it was Wizardry was written in a combination of Pascal and assembly language, and so I really thought I needed to start in Pascal. And it's it's a different thing because John, my husband, he was on the West Coast, and so he was surrounded by loads of people who were into computers. I was in Ogdensburg, New York, and truly there are more cows in St. Lawrence County than there are people. Right? It's very much a rural. It's rural. Salt of the earth, great people.
Oh yeah.
But there were not I was not going to run into a computing club there, and so I thought I needed to learn Pascal because that's what Wizardry was written in, and there was nobody that was going to correct me, So I did eventually when I got into college. I took assembly language in college. I got a C in it. I actually
Okay.
I found my report card. I took assembly language second semester. And my first year was a bit of a, pretty sheltered kid. I was 17 when I went to college. So, it was kid comes out of home. Woo! It's a miracle I got a C, to be honest with you.
Okay.
But yeah, when I was in college, I took basic again because they made you take that before you took the other stuff. But I took assembly language and mostly just math courses and programming courses and writing courses. It was actually a perfect degree for game design. Not that it was called that. It was called technical writing, which is basically I'm going to write manuals about software. And game design is really just writing a manual for software that needs to be made. And so it's more than that, obviously, but certainly my degree didn't hurt. It was half and half computers, math, and writing.
That's
half,
perfect.
a third.
Yeah. I mean that's perfect because game design is so much like you said, it's the writing the manual part, but it's also the writing the fiction part aspects of the game as well, writing the story, the backstory, and all that.
Yeah.
That is why it's in the EU now considered art and preservable, like movies and music and stuff. And that wasn't the case for the longest time. I actually heard in another interview that you got your job in coding during a toilet break. I don't know if I remember that correctly.
No, this is all. That I have the weirdest start in the industry. Yes, so it's barely more nuanced than that. So in northern New York, where I grew up, it's under snow 13 months out of the year, or at least that's what it feels like. So if you smoked, you would sneak a smoke break in the bathrooms. Right, this was not allowed, and I certainly don't advocate smoking, like particularly for any reason, let alone to get a job. But I smoked then, so I was in the bathroom, and a girl came in, and she was obviously looking for a cigarette, but it was obvious from when he would offer her one, she didn't want that one, and she was looking for a non-menthol cigarette, which I had, and so I offered her one, and to be polite, and this girl, she was then a girl, it was Linda, now she's Linda Curry, but she's Linda Saratek, so actually one of the founders of the company, her family founded the company, and she just, I guess to be polite, asked me, did I have a job? No. Had I ever heard of Saratek? No. Had I ever heard of Wizardry? No. Had I ever heard of Dungeons and Dragons? And I was a DM. Right, and so she said, show up, okay, well, I'm sure there was some more chit-chat from there, but show up at the house Tuesday, I think it was October 6th, and show up at the house, and I did, and that was where I first saw Wizardry, and man, I fell in love, and that's when I got the job.
Wow. Oh, that's really amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible luck, really. There have been many times I had a conversation with Robert Woodhead not too long ago, was the original creator. He and Andrew Greenberg were the original creators of Wizardry. And I just said, like, God, what if I hadn't had that conversation? What if I had, like I tried to get a job working in a restaurant. A friend of mine was a waitress in a restaurant. And I tried to get a job in that restaurant, but when I went for the interview, this is so stupid, I had a button-up shirt on, and one of the buttons on my shirt lower down, like beyond my breast, was open. And I couldn't see it, right? But the wife of the owner thought I was trying to pick the owner up. Really? They was going to pick somebody up. That's not how I do it. But anyway, so I didn't get the job. Thank goodness I didn't get the job. Thank goodness for that button. Because, like, I think about that question, do you have a job? Yes. Oh, well, that ends that. And Robert, the reason I brought up Robert's like, no, I'm pretty sure you would have made your way here in some way. But I don't know, like, I don't know how would I have, I was from northern New York, for God's sakes. There were other things that I could have done. I have a feeling I probably would have ended up being a lawyer. I think that's probably the route I would have gone.
Perhaps in the field of video games and licenses and stuff. I've read that you did this job for 18 years. Is that correct?
At Surtech, yeah. Surtech, I was there for 20 years, 81 to 2001.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a long, long time. Why did you leave, or did the company fold?
Well, it happened. The company I was on maternity leave, and I knew, at some point in time, it's like I had worked on games with swords for 20 years. And also, during this time, that there were some, like the Jagged Alliance series, which I loved. But I also knew that I wanted to do something different. And I also think that in general, like this is in the benefit of hindsight, I obviously learned a lot at Surtech. But at some point in time, you are better off. Like, have I learned what I needed to learn here? Should I move sort of to that next level in that next space or whatever, and I really should have done that. I really should have done that. That's not to say that the people there were terrible. They certainly weren't. But I had other lessons to learn from other people, and I wish I would have done that. 20 years is a long time to stay in one place.
Wow. And then you moved to Atari, right?
I did. Let's see. I went from Surtech. Yeah, actually, I did. I went from Surtech to Atari, which was then, it went through many names while I was there. So, Microprose, Hasbro, Infogram, and then Atari, and then it died.
That was actually part of the question. Why Atari, which is so flaky even back then? I mean, as I said, they were pretty unstable in the industry.
Well, because they weren't it wasn't Atari then, right? Like, bear in mind, this was like, MTS Labs, Microprose Studios, this was, and like, probably story I haven't told nearly enough is even though I got into the industry, I got into the industry so early, and I got to see everything grow up, and I got to see the behind the scenes of everything. Civilization 1, which doesn't come out for another 10 years after I start in the industry, but the first Civ was mind-blowing to me. And there was this, like, it's a reaction that I think nobody would have unless they come from, they played pinball or something, like I did, right? So it was an involuntary reaction, like when you get startled, you jump. Right, I had this involuntary reaction because I used to be fascinated in this bowling alley in Ogdensburg. There were pinball games, and I used to, like, when they would work on them, I would love to get behind them and see, like, how are all these things connected, or if they have a top up. I love that. And so there was this one moment in Civilization where something was happening and I couldn't figure out how it was happening, and I involuntarily leaned to look behind the monitor, and I immediately caught myself like, there's nobody behind the monitor. Like, everything's inside. It was a totally involuntary movement. In Civilization 1, to this day, like, if I am banished to an island where I only get one game for the rest of my life, I'm taking Civ Rev.
Wow.
And I have it's ridiculous. I have I have 2 backup consoles just in case the main console dies. I have backup discs so I can play Civ Rev. Maybe if I have to be buried with a game, that's the game that's going into the ground with me. Anyway, I don't even know how I got on that, but I don't know how I got on that. So save me from this because I'm just rambling now.
I mean,
It's a good game to get buried with.
right.
Or to be stuck on an island with.
Right. Yeah. So what happened afterwards? I saw.
You're in Atari. Oh, that's where we were going. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Atari. This is Microprose. So this is Sid Meier's original studio.
Right.
I was basically walking around in, following his ghost.
Yeah.
And even to this day, I know Sid. And even to this day, now obviously, it's been a while since there's been any live events, but whenever I see him and he says, "Hi, Brenda," I'm always like, "Oh my God, it's Sid Meier. Oh my God,
Yeah.
Sid Meier knows me. Oh my God, that fanboy will never, ever die." And I'm sure he's probably heard me tell his story and he's mortified. Maybe he hasn't, but anyway, so I was just delighted to be there. Now, the game that the studio was making was a bit of a weird one. So it was Dungeons and Dragons. I was intimately familiar with that. But it was like an action take on it, and the production mandate. So the mandate from the executive producers was no missions, no quests, same thing, no store, no weapon upgrades. It's basically like an arcade game, and you go in and you just beat your way from the beginning to the end, no gold, no nothing. Mm-hmm. And I remember being being on the gigs for 3 months and going, I don't know that I'm the right designer for this. I know how to make a hardcore RPG where you are leveling up and you are doing, everything you do in a traditional RPG. And believe it or not, God, this sounds like it can't be possible, but I really think it was. We were 3 months from launch when, that's just not fun, right? Sure, it's fun for the first 15 minutes, but at some point in time, you expect in an RPG some kind of progression, right? It's not like Mario going through, different levels and collecting coins, and now you get to go through the next level. And so it was just, we had a big meeting where this one guy, I just said, you have to put this in. And so this one programmer who was really generally very quiet said, he spoke up. It was like a chair speaking. Everybody's like, oh, right? You just wouldn't have done that. Yeah. We have to do what Brenda wants. If this game was not going to be made fun, and so certainly not what the production mandate it had. And so we literally at the last minute slammed in quests. So, and this is into levels that already exist, a leveling system, a store, weapons. It was all at the last minute and on fire. And the fact that game, when people critique it, they're like, it's too easy, you drop through it. It's a miracle. That game is a miracle that it came out as good as it did, because there was such a small amount of time to make that happen. Honestly, it's a miracle. It's a credit to the team that even happened.
As you said, it was originally planned to just go in and fight your way through. I think that would be now be called slash and slay kind of game, where you just brutally.
That's a new one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is Dungeons and Dragons, right? I think you kind of have to pay attention to what do people expect when they have Dungeons and Dragons. I'm going to get a character, I'm going to go into a dungeon, and I'm going to level that character up. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is the very basis of D&D. Yeah. Is this character that carries through and grows. It's character development like that. That is, it's the very basis of that. So. To not deliver that, would be a problem. And I even think we can extend that. There was another game that I worked on, Playboy, which in that is yet another sort of a weird thing that happens. with that, because you couldn't do like when you say, okay, you are now taking Hugh Hefner's shoes, you are in Hugh Hefner's shoes, what do you want to do? Now you don't have to answer that question, right? But there's not a live person who is attracted to women who doesn't say, well, now that you mention this, here are the things that I would like to do if I were Hugh Hefner, right? Not one of those people would go, you know what, that's great that he's got all that stuff, but I'd like to run his magazine empire. Okay, maybe there's like 10 people who might say that, but because of game ratings, we were really limited in what we could do. And so absolutely great IP, but there was a mismatch in between people's expectations. Like I later saw a guy, actually, I just happened to be walking down, this is when, I guess, I'm trying to figure out, who knows what he was coming out with, but he walked out of a store and he had something in like a brown bag, and who knows what it was, but
That's
you
never
can
a good
imagine,
sign.
yeah, well, whatever it was, he came out of the store with that, and he like kind of like shady, and he walked, I was like, that's how people, like that kind of anticipation, like I've got this shady thing in this bag, and I'm going home and gonna have a shady time with this shady thing. And that kind of should have, like, you'd think players would, that's probably what players expected, not I'm gonna run a magazine. But because of the rating system, it would have been, I think, okay in Europe because nudity versus violence, like violence is treated much more strictly over here. But it's the other way in the U.S., and the U.S. is the prime market.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So anyway, it was what it was, and the funny thing about that, the game, every once in a while I'll get an email or somebody will comment on it, and it ended up being a popular adventure game for women. So, most people who say that they really liked it are women. Their boyfriends bought it, right? But they ended up really enjoying it and playing it, which is clearly not the intent. But yeah, it was still, like I learned a lot from that game, and did with it what we could do.
Actually, Wikipedia says your research on that game went into a book published called Sex in Video Games.
Yeah, it did, and I ended up there was nothing, right? There was really nothing that certainly there were a load of sex games, but you would expect this information would have been collated. Like if you were curious about the history of Doom, for instance, buckle in for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. There's so much stuff to read through. But when it came to adult content in video games, there wasn't. And so I just, in the book sounds a lot more titillating than it is. I mean, it's very academic, even the first edition of the book, the publisher refused to put pictures in it. And I would watch people, like, at GDC, they would get the book, and they would take the book, and they'd go like, they're disappointed. Once I got the rights to the book back, it's loaded with pictures now, so those people aren't disappointed. But.
I mean, those type of games, I always wonder how people would find strip poker in the early 80s exciting, given the picture quality on old machines like the Commodore 64 or the Apple II, whatever.
But I think it comes down to, like, if you think about how people, like, this will be an weird topics for game podcasts. But I mean, if you think about how people often have sex with the lights off.
Right.
Right? It's not so much what you see, although sure it is, but it's what your imagination does with what you see. Right? So the fact that the best graphics we had looked like graphics made by a typewriter, well, our minds filled in the blanks, I guess.
True. But here's the interesting thing. If you go figure that all those games were made in the early 80s, and especially the Commodore 64, towards the end of its lifetime, people got more graphic modes and new compression methods. And of course, those coders who developed new graphic modes used porn pictures, as an example.
Well, of course.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah,
So
especially now that everything is so incredibly ubiquitous, it seems ridiculous. Back then, it wasn't. I mean, when I was working on Playboy, one of the things that I learned was that everybody has a Playboy story. Probably not now, but everybody has a Playboy story.
I never played the game. Shame on me.
Not that story. I mean,
Yeah, no.
I mean, you know, I found my father's Playboy. I was at my uncle's, and
Okay.
you know, so and so had a copy and brought it to school. Everybody's got one of those things.
We found there was a rock wall in the woods. We found this old box under some rocks in the corner. Full Playboys when I was like 8 years old.
And now those are probably really collectible.
Yeah, probably. Well, I mean, they were pretty moist at the time. They were sitting outside in a cardboard box. But
Oh yeah, that'd be rough. Yeah.
I'm curious. I should go and see if they're still there. 'Cause it's been 30-some years.
Well, you worked on a lot of interesting stuff. Yeah, it's interesting. And well, what happens then? I mean, after that.
Let's see. Well, so I go. You know, I worked at Atari. I worked at Cyberlore. And then so I was Wizardry and Jagged Alliance and all those games for a while. And then I decide, you know, at that point in time, I had stuff largely to the northeast because that's where my family was from. My mom was ill, and I just didn't want to be too far away, so I stuck largely to the northeast.
Mhm.
And then when my mom passed, then I could, you know, then I felt I could go wherever I wanted to go. So I ended up. I remember I had this, you know, geez, do I want to? Because the game industry was getting, you know, at that point in time, the game industry was getting, well, I guess it's always been pretty cutthroat, pretty ruthless, but it was getting to the point where I was like, my God, like every couple of years, if a company closes, you have to pick up everything and move. And at this point in time, I had 3 little kids, and I wanted some degree of permanence before they went into school. And so I remember standing, you know, at my sister's farm and just looking back. You know, they had a whole bunch of land, and I was just looking back, and I'm like, man, just looking out on this big field of green. I'm thinking, what am I even qualified to do? You know, like I am a lifelong game developer. And so then I just sort of like, I wonder if anybody's teaching video games, because I could do that. So I saw that there was an ad for the Savannah College of Art and Design, and I put, you can't even imagine, like I was clearly coming into there with more experience than anybody, but I still, you know, I was pitching myself like I was pitching a game and trying to save a company. You know, I was. And they didn't even let me get through the whole pitch. They just said, like, you know, you're exactly what we're looking for, and you know, I felt in some sense that I was pre-hired. So I worked at Savannah College of Art and Design. I was the chair there, and I think the great thing about so there's this whole period where I teach at Savannah College of Art and Design, and then and I have taught at a couple other colleges full time, and then even more part time, or just like teaching a course here and there. But one of the great things about that time is because I had been in the industry by then 25 years, and all I had been doing was like, just imagine like you're in a car and you're always in fourth gear. You are always flying it, right? There is no time to stop and go, hold on, what the heck? You know, like this is during this time when I had been exploring it, Ralph Costa had put out Theory of Fun. Rules of Play had come out. Loads of different books. Greg Kosikian had started writing all kinds of stuff. Doug Church was writing things. Most of which I certainly read the stuff Greg was posting about and the stuff that Doug Church was, but I just didn't have time to stop. I didn't have time to stop to play loads of other games or to really go, okay, I've made all these things, but why were these good? Why were these not good? You know, fundamentally, what are the rules of games? And teaching gave me that time to what I felt catch up. You know, to just to look at games from a critical perspective. it also, for the first time, freed me from any kind of commercial limitations. So I could start saying, like, what if I wanted to what if I wanted to make a game about a really horrible experience? Like, can games be about something more than just fun? Right? Like, can they be like movies can be? Like, you can walk out of movies and just be devastated.
Right.
Photographs can capture and express difficult emotions, but games at that point in time, anyway, didn't. Like, the thing that everybody talked about was, oh my goodness, why can't I remember the game? Steve Moretzky game. Is it Planetfall? No, it's not. That's the wrong game. Oh, anyway, there's a scene in a game that I'm going to remember the second we hang up. And that was the one that people usually refer to as something that made people cry. But I wanted to see, could I make games about difficult subjects? And so I picked 6 of the most difficult time periods in human history and tried to make a game about them and tried to make that game as good as I could. And since they were all analog, like, money wasn't an issue. I would say, like, the most expensive of the games is probably a few thousand, and that was, a good chunk of that was for the leather hides that I needed for it. But that was a foundational period in game design for me, because I was able to, not that I expected anybody to ever see them, but I was really able to say, like, what don't I know how to do? How can I do that to the best of my ability? And that best isn't going to be like, well, we promised to ship it, or, we're in this launch cadence and we've got to go out the door now, or, well, there's been all this marketing spend, right? So it was freed of all the industry stuff. Just all of it was gone.
Wow. It's amazing. And then at some point, I mean, reading further down the line, you actually got known for Wizardry 8.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, Wizardry 8, that was like what a great crew that was. Like, that, everybody who was on that team because they loved what they were doing. They loved Wizardry. Linda, that girl who got me into the industry was now no longer a girl. Linda was there. Linda was still working on it. So it was me, Linda, Alex Meduna, Charles Miles, Derek Lalonde. I mean, there was a large team, but we spent days and days and days sitting around a kitchen table. Linda and I were both pregnant, so there was lots of pies and cookies involved. But sitting around a kitchen table just trying to figure out, in the kitchen table, it was in the office. Like, there was a kitchen that was in the office. Right. But yeah, Wizardry 8 was really just a tremendous labor of love. I'm sure there's a story that I don't know, which is why didn't that get a big, a massive big box release everywhere? It did, but eventually it was literally directly sold by EB Games. So it didn't, and I don't know why. I don't know why somebody wouldn't pick that up. It ended up getting 5 RPG of the Year awards.
Yeah, just wanted to say, exactly. It got RPG of the Year award.
Yeah, it was, it was a really good game, an absolute labor of love. It was, I don't have the thought, I wouldn't have been part of any of the discussions, where people have said, yeah, but we don't want that. And it was really, like, it was a weird time for RPGs too, right? Because, there had been a couple very critical questions that had happened during that period of time, which are, do you go multiplayer or not? Right? So Wizardry said not. We're going to stick to single player. Then, do you go massively multiplayer or not?
MMORPG.
Right. And so you're seeing the rise of Ultima Online. There are so Ultima Online, and then Diablo went through the office, like a hurricane. Everybody, and the thing about it is like, when Diablo came out, a lot of the people who worked on traditional hardcore RPGs were like, what's that? It's sort of like shooter. People who play shooters, are like auto aiming. Like, what's that garbage? It's.
I remember that.
Yeah. It wasn't like that bad, but Diablo really showed that what players don't feel like balancing checkbooks while they're playing. They really do. They want to enjoy the RPG experience, but they don't want all the min-maxing stuff that these hardcore RPGs that they have. And we had seen a lot of series, that were dying, like the Ultima series, like the traditional Ultima series, Might and Magic Bard's Tale, SSI Gold Box series. All of those games were falling by the wayside. And then you have these occasional hardcore ones, like Wizardry, like Neverwinter Nights, like Anachronauts, that were more, Anachronauts is certainly different and innovative in many ways. But it was really like, that was the point in time where people were thinking like, well, this is it. Like, hardcore RPGs are dying, and it was that realization. That's why I was standing on the back of the porch at my sister's house, going, "What am I going to do?" Like, I've been making RPGs now basically for 20 some years. What am I qualified? What is it? And now it seems ridiculous because there's tons of RPGs out there. But there was a period in the industry where it was just a big giant car crash for RPGs.
I mean, the same happens with real-time strategy games, RTS. Since Command and Conquer went down, there haven't been many RTS games. So it's the same. It seems to happen with any genre in a period of time in the game industry.
They wax and wane in popularity, and
right.
The nostalgia brings them back.
But we spoke about awards. You even got some awards yourself. For example, top 20 women in games, top 100 most influential women in the game industry, and so on and so forth. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, I figure, like, if you just keep doing the same thing for a very long time, you'll eventually get some kind of award.
Hear that, Jurg? So we just gotta keep doing this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, if you just keep doing it, eventually you make your mistakes, you get your mistakes out of the way, and then you make new mistakes. But eventually you'll hit your stride, I guess. And for me, I think Train was, just in terms of massive innovations, Train will probably be it. Nobody done anything like that before. There's a lot of stuff in Empire of Sin that people haven't done before either. It's a really complicated game. That one is still live, and we're still working on that one.
Wow, nice. I mean, interestingly, as AJ mentioned, most people got an award, or many people, if you do it long enough, and many actually tell us like, "Oh, I'm getting a lifetime achievement award in my 45s. I still want to make games and music and so on." So some people even get them pretty early in their career.
Yeah, I mean, but we are still a fairly young industry, right? And I think that is in part because games have been around a good long time, right? Like, especially if you go back to the 80s, right? So they've been around a good long time, but not many people have stuck around for this length of time.
Yeah, true.
So you have this handful of people that have been making games for 40 years, a much larger handful of people that have been making them for 30 years, and then 20 years. But considering that the average game developer is in and gone in 5 years, 10 years is a lifetime in this industry.
That's actually true. Many people I interviewed that were known for 1 or 2 games, and then after 5 or 10 years, they said like, "I quit." So that's actually true. Yeah. And then, where did it happen that you met John, and then you decided to move to Ireland and made your own studio? I mean, now you are employed by yourself, right? Kind of.
I am. Yeah. So if I have any complaints, I just look in the mirror. So John and I actually met back in '87. He was working then at Origin Systems, and so there had because they were in the Northeast, we had gone over to Origin, and so that's where I first met John. And we so we knew each other, and I guess we were during his like super famous time. He was nearly unapproachable, not because of him, but simply because it was Doom and Quake, and if he was out anywhere, like at E3 or whatever, it was a cloud, right? But John and I, whenever we would go to conferences, John also, like, I don't drink, he doesn't drink, we like to play board games, we're both nerdy in all the appropriate ways. And so we would just end up talking. Like, we come from the same time in the game industry, we worked on competing projects, we know all the same people. And so we were friends for years. And then I was actually working on a master's degree. And I wanted to interview somebody who was sort of a jack of all trades, like who really knew the game industry from code. And I wanted to focus on that person because it was an art master's degree, and see if I could compare their work to a traditional artist's work. So anyway, I settled on this, comparing John Romero's level design style to the painting process of Jackson Pollock, which sounds ridiculous, except Jackson Pollock goes over and over and over painting, and what you're really looking at is an artifact of his painting experience. With John, he does the same exact thing, and any level that he's worked on is an artifact of his play experience. So I was interviewing John about this, and unbeknownst to me, his marriage had fallen apart, and unbeknownst to him, my marriage had fallen apart. And so we just talked for a long time, and then at some point in time, he literally, like, at some point in time, we're aware of this, we never talked about it. And at one point in time, he was just on his way, I think, to E3, and he just sent me a text to say he was getting on the plane, and just said, "I love you," and hit send, and I just
wow.
What?
Okay.
So I was on a plane, and I can't say anything, right? So I think I probably called Sherry Grainer Ray thing. But the funniest thing about that, the entire thing, was that our closest friends were like, obviously, like, we wondered when this was going to happen, right? And all of us were like,
Right.
we could have said something like literally anything in the last 25 years. But it's, so anyway, we become a couple, we've been a couple for a long time. We end up working, John is always drawn to what is the new thing that people are doing, and can he do it better? And so we started actually working in social games. He got working on Ravenwood Fair, which, it's funny because the industry, so many people were like, "Oh, Romero's working on social games." The game that he made had 25 million monthly players. It was bigger than WoW at the time, and well, not just he made it; like, we both worked on it. But we ended up making Ravenwood Fair. Then we left the company where we did that and started our own company. And we ran that company for 5 years, working in social and mobile games. And it was great. Like, it was, like, if you think about D&D, like, D&D is a game that you play synchronously with, well, I guess asynchronously, people around the table, everybody's taking their turn asynchronously, and then either figuring out what happens. But, imagine making a game where you have hundreds or millions of people playing all asynchronously. It was so fascinating. So, and for the first time in my career, people were really trying to focus on, female gamers, right? Like, nobody cared about that before. So it was fascinating, and it was a blast. Then, during that time, I was awarded a Fulbright to come to Ireland to study its game industry. So we drive all over Ireland, top to bottom. We were here for 3 months. And the short version of that is we just fell in love with the community.
Wow.
And the goal of the Fulbright is to sort of write a report and, what are the highs and lows. And I was just wondering, like, why aren't we here? This is absolutely incredible. Like, why wouldn't we want to be part of this industry? And so we moved here 5 years ago, 6 years ago now, and have zero regrets, except maybe like I wish we would have come sooner. But other than that, zero regrets.
Interesting is you mentioned that the game industry sometimes is a bit like high-end fire and unstable and so on. You know, of course, since I'm interviewing people like you, I also have some friends and people I know in the game industry. And when I said like, okay, I'm working on interviewing the Romeros, I was told that this could be difficult. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, and people were like, how did you get John to talk to you? And I said, like, I asked him. So I sent an email, asked him, and was like one of the nicest people I've met. No problems whatsoever, you know.
He really is. He's a super. I mean, obviously, I'm hugely biased, but he really is a super nice guy.
So I don't know why people think that John is untouchable or why it's so difficult, but I had no problem.
Probably, so I would say, so as a lot of the emails, there's a basic email that is on our site that, you know, here, go ahead and send an email in. He probably gets, I would say, like, so I'm looking at my email right now. There is one request that I'm positive because it says invite you to be on, and I can't imagine it's not going to say podcast after that or stream or something. But he probably gets 2-3 requests a day.
Wow. Okay.
So he could do it full time. It doesn't pay anything, but he could do it full time. So.
Right.
But I think there are certain things, you know, for him, like, you know, focusing on retro stuff and game history is incredibly important.
That's why I invited you guys. That's exactly why. And
that's what we do.
That's why I wanted to talk to you separately and not in the same interview, because I want to cover both of your stories and get equally rights to everybody. Especially since you mentioned in that interview, people always focus on John and not on your career. So.
Well, it's, you know, I mean, the thing about it is it's not so much like, you know, it depends on if they're separate. But John, I think, funny enough, I think the biggest issue, like Doom and Quake were out. They are, you know, it's like, you know, parking a Ferrari on the street. They were mega successes, you know, like it's everybody knows them, and even it's like, you know, it's like Black Sabbath, like everybody's heard all their songs, but it doesn't mean you don't want to hear them all again, right?
Right.
And plus with John, he has hyperthymesia, which is a near photograph. It's a near perfect autobiographical recall. So if you ask me a question, you are going to get what I remember from 1981. If you ask John a question, you are going to get every single piece of detail that he has not forgotten since 1981, right? So,
wow.
Yeah, so it's always interesting, but yeah, no, it's fun interviewing with him or separately. Like, you know, we've done loads of interviews together. Some of the most, we did this once because a host dropped out at the last second. I'm like, well, I can ask him questions. You know, I'm comfortable on stage.
Wow,
and
okay.
I know his story. So I went out and I interviewed John. And because I know, like, the interesting things that people have not asked 100 times, and I just know his story. And so actually since then, that was an accident, but it's probably happened, I don't know, 10 times since then, where it's me interviewing John.
Wow, interesting. Yeah. Well, you notice I'm persistent, so I kept asking you for 4 years when you have time. So
He'll keep going.
Pardon?
It's been 4 years.
4 years, yes, 4 years.
You are persistent, my God.
Yeah,
okay, well,
and you emailed me like, try again half a year, try again in a year, and then some weeks ago you were like, you know what? I'm sending this to my secretary. Now you make an appointment. So it sounded like you were fed up with me asking you or something.
No way. I mean, the thing is, like, it wouldn't be fed. If anything, impressed with the persistence. I I wouldn't, when somebody cares enough about your work to want to talk to you about it, that's no reason to ever be fed up with something. If you wanted to call and harass me, sure, I'd be fed up then. No, I mean, that's an honor.
No. I mean, you can ask AJ. Some people I was after for 10 years.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
he is persistent, and he knows who's important and who to go after.
Right.
So.
At least I try. Right. Well, so what's your future plans right now?
Right now, working on Empire of Sin. Absolutely, we're working on DLC. We're working on the Make It Count DLC right now, and then obviously I can't say what's beyond that, but Empire of Sin for the foreseeable future anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Real quick, I'm gonna just I just followed her on Twitter, and it says metal music lover. What is your favorite metal band?
Oh my god. Oh my god, this is such a hard question, and it should not be, because I go between Judas Priest and Black Sabbath, which is like the canonical answer.
Right.
But like edging in there is a group called Pain of Salvation. And oh my god, do I love Pain of Salvation. If you have not listened to Pain of Salvation, they're more like a progressive metal band. God, do I love them. I can't even, there's a live video on YouTube that if, like how you wear tapes out or you wear records out? I would have worn YouTube out if that were possible. So I absolutely love this band. They're fantastic. So, it's the canonical answer is I can't make up my mind between Judas Priest and Black Sabbath. It depends on the day.
Right.
What am I listening to the most right now would probably be Pain of Salvation. Absolutely love them and have loved them for the last 3-4 years.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
I'll add that to my repertoire. We'll
you'll love it. It's so good.
Yeah, and your stuff can be found, I guess, on Romero.com, right?
Yeah, Romero.com or RomeroGames.com. Yeah, or if you're interested in my board games, I think it's Brenda.games.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, also Brenda.games.
Wonderful.
And you've got a fantastic Twitter handle. It's just @VR.
Yeah, that's old school.
Yeah.
But it's the downside of having such a short handle is it means I get, like, when I look at my mentions column, probably 70 or 80% of it is pure spam. Yeah, so that's the downside of it. But it is nice to have that short handle. It certainly works on any business card, any slide deck, anything.
Yeah.
Well, I got myself Jörg at Drö.ge, which is just my name. So trying to explain it to my mom, like, why GE? Because it's Drö.ge. So I understand. Everybody's confused about my email address when I tell them. Right. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good one.